Family, the bonds of blood that tie us together through life's triumphs and tragedies. The nurturing hands of parents and grandparents that mold us. The refuge we find in their loving embrace against the storms of childhood. But what happens when those most trusted bonds are tested by forces more sinister than we can imagine? When the lessons taught and memories made clash against a darkness invading from outside? Do we stand frozen or fight for all we hold dear? Tonight, we share the tale of a family's love that spanned generations, and the night that love was challenged by an ancient evil lurking right outside their door. A night when comforting arms gave way to paralyzing fear, and the only choice was to run or make a final stand. So gather close and hold tight to those you cherish as we dim the lights and journey into the darkness. This is Dark Waters Radio, storytelling perfected.
It's hard to tell this story, and as far as my brother is concerned, it shouldn't be told. However, I decided I wanted people to know. Let me start here. My twin brother and I were born in South Louisiana, a huge family. My father, Cabe, who I'm named after, was sort of the black sheep of the family. Him and my mom got married young. He was 22 and she was 19 when they got married, and the family didn't like my mom. Why? To this day, we don't know. The fact that we have aunties could have something to do with it, or it could be my grandmother, who's known to be an evil bitch at times. Nonetheless, my brother Colin and I were brought into this world, and we were loved deeply by our parents. Now, my father, he was an avid outdoorsman, hunter and fisherman, and we were in the woods as soon as we could talk. Not hunting, of course. But I have baby photos of my brother and I stumbling along in the woods with my parents as they camped. Fast forward, I'm 20 years old and my father gets sick, the big C, cancer. And I mean, this comes out of nowhere. Now he's going through treatments for colon cancer and it's aggressive. When he gets diagnosed, we're all praying that my father will beat this cancer. We reach out to his sisters, and of course, they're acting like nothing's wrong. And I need you to understand something. The strife and animosity that existed and came from them, not from my dad, my mom, but from them, was like a hot knife. I mean, it really burned and cut. Well, get this. 6 months pass, dad dies, and my mom is heartbroken. My brother and I have to take care of all the funeral arrangements, and his sisters decide they're going to come to the funeral. And I need you to understand, they did not visit my father not one time while he was sick. Then when they get to the funeral, they're crying, falling out, acting crazy. And when they realize that he was cremated, they lose their freaking minds. Now, it was my father's dying wish that he be cremated and his ashes be spread in the woods where our family camped. And they would have known this if they had actually taken time to visit their brother, but they didn't. And let me say this about my mom. You see, mom really is an angel of a woman. Because imagine a scene for a moment. These women, his sisters who rejected her and her kids, didn't have enough respect to visit their brother while he was dying. And now, after the funeral services, they're all in her face, questioning her about their brother, her husband's dying wishes. My mom is so gracious and so loving that she only tells them that she's sorry for their loss. I'm standing there listening to her say this, and she says, "I'm sorry for your loss." While she's the one who's lost the love of her life and the father of her children. Later that evening, when we're alone, my brother Colin is pissed. And I need you to understand something. Colin has a terrible temper, got it directly from Dad. And you can see that he's sitting there thinking about what happened. Mom turns to him and says, son, now don't let them people harden your heart with their foolishness. What you witnessed was their regrets on display. They're the ones that had to live with the fact that they did not do right by their brother. Let them carry that burden all by themselves. You be the man your father raised you to be. You understand? And he will be proud of you being that man. That night, we all huddled together in the living room and cried, and then planned to go to the campgrounds and spend the night and spread his ashes. Now, Mom worked as a nurse, and she had already taken so much time off work for Dad that it took quite a while for us to get around to taking a camper out to the site. I say about a month and a half passed after the funeral before we could actually fulfill his wishes. When we finally got around to, the three of us went to what we like to call the Snugs Forest. Now, technically, this was a lake with some trees on some private land that my dad had leased from a friend in exchange for helping him fix his fishing boat. I remember my dad always saying that fixing that boat was the best investment that he ever made. We spent so much time as a family there. I remember catching my first fish right there in that lake, a giant catfish when I was 9 years old. This thing starts to pull me into the water, and Colin and I fought that fish together for 15 minutes, mud all over our faces. Dad is standing there watching the entire time. Behind us, my mom is screaming at him, help those boys. And I remember him saying to her, nope, I'm not lifting a finger. You need men for sons, not pansies. Let them fight. No matter if they lose or win, either way, it's going to be a story they tell for the rest of their lives. Well, guess what? We caught that fish, cleaned it, and cooked it that day. And he was right. We would never forget catching that fish for the rest of our lives. Now, when we finally get to the campsite, it's 9 a.m. My brother and I clear everything out, gather firewood, and Mom is inside the camper prepping for the fish that we would catch. Sure enough, by 12 noon, we had 6 catfish. And hold on and explain this to you. There is nothing, I mean nothing like Mom's blackened catfish sandwich. And if you've never had a fresh blackened catfish sandwich, I advise that you go get one immediately. We sat outside in our chairs, talked and reminisced about Dad. The last time we were all out there together. We were sitting out there talking, and this deer just comes out of the woods, looks at us, then walks right up to my dad, sniffs his arm, and then walks off. Never seen anything like that before, and I don't think I ever seen anything like that again. And Mom started telling us things about our childhood from her perspective, like how afraid she was when Dad first taught us how to shoot guns. She said, I was just so afraid that one of you would shoot the other one, but nope, your father trained you right. Then when the rifles came out, it was crazy. Mom stands up, walks over to a tree, and starts pointing up. Hey, see up there? Those holes in that tree? Cape, that's when you decided you wanted to have squirrel for breakfast. Got up at 6 a.m. and started shooting at them. Damn near gave me and your dad a heart attack. Colin looks at me and says, yeah, you idiot. We were all asleep, and you come outside blasting at squirrels with a rifle. And laughter fills the evening air as we reminisce into the night. It was around 7:45 p.m. And I knew it, and they knew it. We had been avoiding this all day long. We needed to spread my father's ashes. And even though my father was gone, still felt like he was there. And the idea of taking his physical body, his dirt body, and spreading it out was something I really couldn't handle. But Colin stands up and says, well, we should go ahead on and follow Dad's wishes and get this done. So he goes inside, gets to urn with my dad's ashes, come back out. We stand up and say a prayer, thanking God for the time we had with our father, for the lessons that he taught us, for the husband that he was, and the time that we spent with him. And Mom starts crying. I mean, breaks down, falls to her knees crying. I'm there holding her as Colin is walking around the fire, spreading the ashes. Then he makes 3 bigger circles, going further and further out, spreading my father's ashes. When he gets over there close to the wood line, to that squirrel tree, I hear him say, "What the fuck is that?" Now, Colin is running back in our direction, darts past me and my mom into the camper, and comes out with a rifle. The two of us are there. Understand, my mom is down on her knees crying on the ground. I'm squatted down next to her. The two of us are completely and totally confused as to what's going on. Then Colin clicks on the rail-mounted light of his rifle, and we see this set of eyes. Right there in the tree line, 9 feet in the air, golden eyes shine, these massive eyes the size of a balled-up fist. Now, my brother and I had no clue what this was, but clearly Mom did, because she jumps up from the ground saying, "Boys, we need to go and we need to leave right now," and darts back inside the camper and cranks it up. Colin is now shining a light up and down, and this thing is a massive black creature. Not a bear, but as big as a bear. It has this body kind of like a man, but it's more muscular and the head of a wolf. He's got the light shining right on this thing, and then it steps back out of the light into the woods and looks away. The eye shine is gone. So now I'm like, "Listen, Colin, we need to go. Let's get out of here." And as Colin is backing away towards me, it growls. And listen to me when I say this to you, there is no sound that can do justice to that growl. Nothing at all can compare to this. The vibration alone was terrifying. You felt it in your veins, your muscles, and your bone. Now Mom is there, her head hanging out of the camper door, saying, "Boys, listen, we need to go." And it was right then and there, that thing charged. Now, I don't know if it was supposed to be a bluff charge or if it's supposed to be a real charge. Only thing I know is that it came out of those woods at us, and Colin started shooting. Lets off 9 shots, and I've heard people say that Dogman can't be shot. Well, that's a lie, because that thing realized it was being shot. Its body jerked and twisted, and then it turned and ran back into the darkness. So now I run back inside the camper to get our other rifle, and you can hear this thing tearing through the woods, circling us, and it's pissed, growling, grunting. Mom is screaming, "Get inside, come on, get inside." And for some reason, Colin is standing his ground. Later, I would come to understand exactly why he did this, but in that moment, I was not only confused and scared, but I was kind of pissed off at my brother, because all we had to do was get the hell out of there. But one thing I knew was I wasn't leaving him out there alone. So now we're both out there with our rifles, listening to this thing as it circles us, stops, and then you can hear it climbing up into a tree. When we shine that light in that tree, it's there, perched 40 feet in the air. And the two of us light his ass up. I know I fired at least 26 rounds of my 30-round mag, and Colin had to fire at least 12 more rounds. When you hear this thing falling out of the tree, and I'm not talking about falling just hitting the ground like smack, I'm talking about falling, hitting limbs cracking and breaking on its way to the ground, and then this thud. Now my mom is outside with us, and when I turn and look at her and see the fear in her eyes, combined with the words that came out of her mouth, I knew we had to go. Because she says, "I just lost your father, and I'm not losing the two of you. Let's fucking go right now." Now pause right here and let me say something about my mother, Carol Snuggs. Then there's people who swear once every now and then. Then there's people like Carol who never ever swear or curse at all. That night was the first time I had ever heard my mother use a swear word. And the look in her eyes was this fear, but it was compounded, like she knew more than she could say in that moment. The best way to describe it is a deep fear, like it had been there before and it resurfaced again. So I pulled Colin back inside the camper and we drive off. The entire time we're circling around the lake to get to the road, Mom is freaking out, going from window to window looking out. Then when we hit the road, she's still losing it. And my mother doesn't calm down until we're 12 miles away from that place. And then she just starts crying again, and we ride in silence for the next 30 minutes until we get home. Get this, when we pull up in front of the house, Mom is so afraid, she won't leave the camper to walk out into the darkness to go into the house. So my brother and I escort her into the house, upstairs into the bedroom. When I finally get a moment alone with Colin to talk to him about the situation, I'm pissed. And I'm like, Colin, why did you start shooting at this thing? We had Mom with us. It could have gotten her. That's when Colin goes on to break down to me what he was thinking. He says, man, that's our family spot. We grew up there. It was our home in the woods, our home away from home. Nothing is going to take that from us. We already lost our father, and I couldn't do anything about losing Dad. But this situation, I could control. I could decide if we were going to run or not, or if it was going to take that land from us or not. And I wasn't letting it have it. Then my brother broke down into tears. I understood exactly what he was saying and how he felt. So the next morning, we grabbed our rifles, our ammo, headed right back to that spot before sunrise. Went searching for that thing. Found blood in the trees, a blood trail on the ground, and followed it around the backside of the lake. The two of us traveled 9 miles that day until we got to the point where it was just swamp. You needed a boat to go back up in there. And that's where this thing went. Well, when we get back home, Mom already knew what we had done. She already knew why. And that's when she sat us down and explained to us what she knew about the rougarou, or the Dogman, as you call it. She said when we were 5 years old, we all went to that same lake. This was before Dad had cleared the section of land that we call our campsite. That we were in those woods walking around playing with Dad. She was back at the camper when she heard him calling her name from the woods, screaming to her to come and get us. So now she runs out of the camper into the woods towards him, and she finds him standing there in front of the two of us, facing off with this massive black wolf down on all fours. And she said the only weapon Dad had on him at that time was a revolver. He had it pointed at this thing and told her to take us, get the camper, and leave him there. Now, well, she didn't exactly listen to my dad. She took us, ran back to the camper, hopped in, and drove it into the woods between trees, over logs, and right up to him, blowing the horn all the way in, and ran this thing off. According to Mom, that was the first time they saw this thing. However, little did we know that there were multiple times that it was around when we were kids. They just never told us about it because it always kept us distance. And Dad didn't want us to be afraid of the woods. The next weekend, we go back and camp out. Not in a family camper, but in tents. My brother and I decided that this was going to be the place where our family and our kids and our grandkids come to enjoy the same peace that we enjoyed when we grew up. And this thing had to go. We're out there Friday night, nothing. Saturday night, nothing. Early Sunday morning at 4:44 a.m., Colin wakes me up and we hear something out in the woods moving around. And I know without a doubt, I could feel in my soul that this is it. The both of us come out ready to lay down fire, and it's 2 deer off in the woods. 2 weeks later, we go again, and nothing. It's not there. A month passes. My brother and I go back again, trek all through the woods around the lake looking for signs of this thing. And it's not there. So now either in our mind this thing is dead, or it doesn't want anything to do with us anymore.
My name's Annie, and I've lived alone on this little plot of land tucked back in the woods for going on 15 years now. It ain't much, just a small 1-story house with a big front porch and a backyard that runs right up to the tree line. I inherited the place from my grandpa after he passed. We were always real close, him and me. I used to spend every summer here with him when I was a kid, running around barefoot, swimming in the creek, and listening to Grandpa's stories at night on the porch while we watched the fireflies. After high school, I just couldn't stand being cooped up in the city anymore, so I decided to move out here to the country and make this place my own. My family thought I was crazy living all the way out here by myself, but I loved the peace and quiet. The first few years were the hardest, trying to fix up Grandpa's old house and get used to being so far from everything. But eventually this place started feeling like home. Now it's just me and my 2 old hound dogs, Dixie and Scout. We spend our days pretty quiet-like, puttering around the house and yard, taking long walks through the woods. The closest neighbor's about a mile down the road, so it's just us out here. At night I can see every star in the sky. When the wind blows, I can hear the creek rushing over the rocks. It's solitude, but I'm not ever really lonely. This land just has a way of comforting you. Grandpa always said it had a spirit about it. I feel closest to him when I'm working in my garden round back. I swear I can almost hear his whistling sometimes when I'm pulling weeds and tending to my tomatoes. He taught me everything I know about growing. I've got his little potting shed still standing and some of his old tools hanging up inside. Dixie and Scout will wander around sniffing for gophers while I work. Then we'll take a break on the back porch, looking out at the trees, watching the birds flit around. Grandpa's rocking chair still creaks in the same old familiar way. Yep, we've got ourselves a good life here. But things changed a bit a few years back when I started noticing some odd happenings around the property. It was little stuff at first, just a strange feeling like I was being watched from the woods. The dogs would perk up sometimes and stare off into the trees, growling low. Then I started finding weird footprints around the house and the chicken coop, huge paw prints bigger than a bear's. One morning I came out to find some of the chickens slaughtered, their blood splattered around. That really rattled me. Dixie and Scout were on edge for days after that, patrolling the yard, barking at every little noise from the forest. But things only got stranger from there. One night, a huge storm rolled through. Thunder shook the house, rain lashing the windows. Well, just as it was finally letting up, Dixie and Scout started baying like mad outside. I jumped up, and there in the backyard was the biggest, blackest wolf I ever saw. On 2 legs, staring right at me through the glass. I swear it had to be over 7 feet tall. Its eyes seemed to glow yellow, and it was covered in shaggy fur, lips curled back over these long, jagged teeth. My heart about stopped, and I screamed as I turned to grab Grandpa's old rifle by the door. The thing turned and loped off toward the trees. It scared them pups so bad, they wouldn't go near the tree line for days. I didn't get a wink of sleep that night, just stayed up watching out the windows with my rifle across my knees. I hoped like hell I'd never see that thing again. But sure enough, a couple weeks later I caught a glimpse of it at dusk, stalking across the backyard. I locked myself in the house and stayed put till morning. I went out at sunrise to check around, rifle in hand, and found more huge paw prints, claw marks gouged into the trees near the house. By that point, I was getting scared enough to think about leaving the place altogether. But where would I go? This was my home. I couldn't let some monster run me off Grandpa's land. So the next time it turned up was a couple months after that. In the dead of night, I woke to an ungodly howling outside the house. Sent a chill right down my bones. The dogs were barking up a storm, and then I heard something big hit the side of the house with a thump. Dixie and Scout snarling turned to whimpers as they scrambled under my bed. I crept over to the window and peeked out. There it was by the porch, hunched down with its back to the house. Slowly, I opened the window and aimed my rifle right at it. My finger quivered over the trigger as I drew a bead on it in the moonlight. As I watched, it reared up, rising taller and taller until it stood over 8 feet at the shoulder. It was broad and muscular, covered in that same shaggy black fur. It had a wolfish face but almost human-like hands with claws like daggers. This was no ordinary wolf or bear. This was something right out of a nightmare. As I'm debating whether to shoot, the thing lets out a howl that I sag back against the wall, heart racing, fit to burst out of my chest. Well, after that, I wasn't taking any chances. The next day, I drove into town and bought myself a new rifle, one of them big game numbers. I started keeping it right by the door, loaded and ready to go. I wasn't about to let this monster hurt me or my dogs. Night after night, I lay awake, listening for any sound of it coming around. But weeks went by without a sign of it on the property. I hoped it had moved on and found somewhere else to haunt. Dixie and Scout eventually settled back down, seemed less spooked. Then one morning, I'm drinking my coffee on the porch as the sun comes up. The dogs wander over by the shed, sniffing around as they're prone to do. But suddenly they stop dead in their tracks, hackles raised, growling at something behind the shed. Slow and easy, I take my rifle and creep down the porch steps toward them. As I get closer, I smell this god-awful stench, like rotten meat and wet fur. I gag and cover my nose with one hand. Careful now, I creep around the side of the shed. The dogs keep snarling. Then their heads whip around to look at me, and they break off toward the house. And that's when I see it, crouched there behind the shed, just 10 feet away from me. It's hunched over Grandpa's old wheelbarrow, the very one he used for hauling compost and mulch around the garden. Only now it's filled with something dead and reeking. The creature looks up at me. Blood is dripping from its jaws. Its eyes seem to glow yellow in the shadows. We stare at each other for a long, tense moment. My rifle's aimed right at its chest. I try to steady my shaking hands. The thing rises up from its crouch, real slow. I'm frozen in place, heart hammering so loud I can't think. We're locked there in that standoff as the sun breaks over the treetops behind me. Then, the beast tips back its head and lets loose the most ear-splitting howl you ever heard. Before I can even react, it bounds off on all fours and disappears into the woods. I stagger back against the shed, gasping for breath. When I can finally walk again, I go look in that wheelbarrow, though I'm dreading what I'll find. Sure enough, there's the savage body of a deer, guts torn out, head near ripped clean off. I stumble back to the porch and collapse into Grandpa's old rocker. Dixie and Scout huddle under my feet as I try to wrap my head around what just happened. It's been a few months since that last run-in now, and I ain't seen hide nor hair of that beast since, but I can tell you one thing's for certain. I ain't never letting my guard down out here again. These days, I keep my shotgun by the door, loaded and ready to go at all times. I've got motion sensor lights set up all around the house now too, and I don't dare step foot outside once the sun goes down. Sometimes I lay awake and wonder if it's still out there somewhere, lurking in the shadows between the trees, watching and waiting. This land might have a spirit about it, like Grandpa always said, but it's got a darkness too. Something ancient and wild that I reckon will outlive me and may well keep calling this place home long after I'm gone. But I'll be damned if I let it drive me out. So for now it's just me, the dogs, the woods, and whatever nightmares are living in them.